A man accidentally fell into a nest of vampires. He was about to be eaten. Unexpectedly, the vampire queen was captivated by his looks. To completely possess this human, she dripped her own ancestral vampire blood into the man's mouth. As the blood continued to erode, the holy light power in the man's body, intertwined with the unique magic of the vampire clan, unexpectedly spawning a more terrifying mutation, and just like that, the world's first vampire immune to sunlight was born. And the first thing he did after completing his transformation, was to lead countless vampires into the human world. At this moment, in a farm on the outskirts, the farmer was the first to sense the arrival of this disaster. He loudly signaled for his wife and daughter to hide. Upon hearing this, his wife reacted immediately, pulling open the cellar door hidden under the carpet, pushing her daughter, who hadn't yet reacted, inside, and urging her not to come out no matter what happened. Outside, before long, voices erupted one after another on the ground. There were gunshots and the roars of vampires, eventually fading away with the shrill death cries of her parents. The girl covered her mouth, praying she wouldn't be found, but the next second, the cellar door was roughly pulled open. The vampires regarded this slaughter as a carnival. Little did they know they had provoked someone they shouldn't have. It is said that humans and vampires were born into the world at the same time, yet they have been incompatible since ancient times. Over thousands of years, the war between the two races has never ceased. Although the vampire clan is born with stronger physiques than humans, they are extremely afraid of sunlight, so humans use this fatal weakness to fight the vampires to a standstill. But years of war not only caused heavy casualties on both sides, it also plunged the earth into an abyss once again. To survive, the remaining humans had to huddle in a holy city ruled by the church. Fortunately, there is always a way out. An order of demon hunters dedicated to fighting vampires emerged out of nowhere. A striking cross symbol was tattooed on their foreheads. Each of them possessed unique skills and extraordinary martial arts. Thanks to the bloody battles of these heroes, the human camp finally achieved victory. The remaining vampires were imprisoned in a remote fortress, guarded closely by special personnel. After the war ended, the world pattern underwent drastic changes. The church rose to become the core of power in this wasteland world, but as time went on, the church's fear of the demon-hunting clerics grew deeper and deeper, fearing that this team would threaten its authority. So they not only disbanded this demon-hunting order, that had rendered extraordinary meritorious service, they also launched a series of suppressions against the clerics. The former savior heroes were stigmatized as heretics. Their freedom of movement was restricted. Overnight, they became street rats spurned by everyone, and the church, corrupted by greed and ambition, gradually degenerated into a cult disguised in religious robes. They resorted to all means to inculcate distorted doctrines into the people, repeatedly proclaiming in the name of God that only absolute obedience to the church can bring redemption and peace. This ideological infiltration and control left the people spiritually controlled by the church. Even Paul, the former leader of the demon-hunting order, was helpless in the face of this. At this time, apart from completing his heavy daily work, he went to the confessional to listen to the archbishop's teachings.
Remember, to go against the church is to go against God.
Until this day, a police officer named Hicks found Paul, claiming he had come to ask for help on someone's behalf. It turned out that the farmer attacked by vampires earlier was Paul's elder brother. After learning that the vampires had not only attacked his brother's family, but also abducted his niece Lucy, Paul was instantly thrown into a panic. He didn't dare to delay for a moment, and immediately set off for the Vatican to meet with the 5 archbishops, entreating them to restore his authority as a demon-hunting cleric to rescue his niece. But his request was rejected. The Vatican even ordered Paul to cover up the matter, fearing that the vampire attack would cause panic, undermining the foundation of their painstakingly built rule. Even though an elderly veteran instructor stepped forward to intercede for the hero, there was still no room for maneuver. Paul had to leave the Vatican in anger, but even without obtaining operational authority, he had already made up his mind. No one could stop him from saving his family. So he ignored the veteran instructor's persuasion, resolving to break his former oath and leave the Vatican. Seeing that he was determined to go, the veteran instructor had to arrest Paul in accordance with the rules. But those ordinary soldiers stood no chance against the strongest demon-hunting warrior. They could only be overwhelmed. after dealing with all those who stood in his way, Paul quickly returned to his residence and picked up his former demon-forged divine weapons. Then he opened the long-sealed garage, driving a futuristic and aggressive motorcycle, speeding away from this seemingly sacred city, which was actually utterly corrupt. After days of non-stop long-distance travel, Paul crossed the desert and reached his destination, but by then, his brother was on the verge of death. Paul's eyes were filled with heartache and remorse. He tightly held his brother's hand, but there was nothing he could do to save him.
And you promised me something, brother. Kill them all.
His brother used his last strength to leave a message before taking his final breath. After burying his loved ones, Paul began his pre-battle preparations. He carved a cross symbol on each bullet with a sharp dagger. At this moment, Sheriff Hicks walked in, saying he wanted to go with him to rescue Lucy, but Paul refused, stating that he was not capable of fighting vampires. Upon hearing this, Hicks immediately picked up a bullet. A cold glint flashed. A throwing knife accurately split it into two. He then looked at Paul triumphantly, asking if this proved his worth. Little did he know that the bullets had been specially prepared for him. After all, demon hunters had always fought with cold weapons, and just like that, Hicks passed the test and officially joined Paul's team. At the same time, the senior officials of the Vatican in the Holy City had also learned of Paul's defection, so they dispatched 4 top demon-hunting clerics, ordering them to bring him back to the Holy City for trial at all costs. As former members of the demon-hunting order, the combat power of these 4 wasn't to be underestimated, but when they learned that the person they were to arrest was their former leader, everyone's expressions turned extremely complicated. At this moment, Paul and Hicks had located the vampire's hiding place based on the traces left at the scene. It was in the Munsau Reservation number 98. This place had once been a cage for countless vampire prisoners, but now it had long since become a paradise for the fallen. The so-called fallen were actually exiles abandoned by the church, unable to obtain protection from the Holy City. They could only struggle in the borderlands all year round. To survive, many had to submit to the vampire's rule and become their servants, and once they accepted the vampire's blood, they would become half-human, half-vampire ghouls. Paul and Hicks wandered through the shacks, trying to find out Lucy's whereabouts from a mutated person, but the other party avoided eye contact and answered irrelevant questions, revealing no useful information. Realizing they couldn't get any information out of him, the two stopped wasting time and headed to the underground prison that once held vampires. The two descended step by step along the stairs. A disgusting stench of decay hit their noses, choking them almost breathless. The mottled black bloodstains on the doors and the piles of white bones on the ground were even more shocking. As the two carefully surveyed their surroundings, they suddenly caught a glimpse of a pair of eerie eyes peering at their movements. Upon noticing, Paul violently kicked open the heavy cell door, grabbed the ghoul inside and interrogated him about Lucy's whereabouts, but the other party screamed in terror, unable to answer Paul's questions normally. All of a sudden, a sharp sound of metal scraping rang out. Hicks immediately turned around alertly to check, only to find a group of armed ghouls emerging from the shadows. Hicks quickly drew the throwing knife thrown at him, successfully counter-killing the ghoul rushing at the forefront. Then he covered the wound on his arm, loudly urging Paul to leave quickly, but received no response. Hicks had to evacuate outside the prison first, but as soon as he rushed to the bunker entrance, he collided head-on with the long-ambushed ghouls. He hurriedly dodged to the side in panic. Too embarrassed to care, he rolled down the high platform. It was only then that Hicks realized, from the moment they stepped into the reservation, they had fallen into the trap set by the vampires. Hicks hastily pulled out his pistol, but just as he was about to pull the trigger, Paul suddenly descended from the sky, stopping him from firing, because these low-level ghouls with weak combat power were not worthy of wasting the cross-engraved silver bullets. With that said, he rushed into the group of ghouls, easily ending this battle of overwhelming strength. However, Paul deliberately left one alive, trying to threaten the other party with torture to reveal Lucy's whereabouts. But as soon as he finished speaking, night fell rapidly. Darkness engulfed the entire area. The vampire's carnival time officially began. Pairs of withered black hands pushed open the coffin lids. Immediately afterwards, several ghostly figures leaped out of the bunker and surrounded Paul and Hicks. Each of them had an ugly appearance and sharp fangs, able to easily sense humans' positions and movements in the dark. Yet at this life-or-death moment, Paul calmly took out a Bible, then began to recite scriptures in a low voice.
Thou art with me.
Hicks also quickly pulled out his pistol to assist, but he still underestimated the vampire's speed. A black shadow flashed in front of him in an instant. Sharp claws were about to tear his throat apart. Fortunately, in the critical moment, Paul threw a silver cross and hit the vampire. Hicks narrowly escaped death by luck. The last vampire, seeing its companions die one after another, could only let out an angry roar at the two, then turned around and fled into the darkness. The ghouls, who had been extremely arrogant, instantly lost the courage to resist when they saw their masters abandon them and leave. But just as he mentioned that Lucy had been taken west, the escaped vampire descended from the sky again, clearly wanting to silence the ghoul. Fortunately, Paul acted quickly and pulled it down directly, then quickly got up and pounced on the vampire, but rolled into the bunker together with it. Hicks immediately pulled out his pistol nervously, the muzzle aimed at the exit of the underground fortress. Fortunately, it didn't take long. Paul climbed up covered in blood. Seeing that he was still alive, Hicks finally let out a long sigh of relief, but after a series of thrilling events, Paul felt more and more uneasy, because there had once been 50 vampires imprisoned in this reservation, but now only 6 of the weakest inferior vampires remained, and each was emaciated as if they had been starving for a long time. All kinds of abnormal signs made Paul feel that recent events were not just simple vampire mischief, but that the vampire queen was manipulating a bigger conspiracy behind the scenes. So he decided to act on the information provided by the ghoul, to go to the nest called Wall of the Sun in the west. It had been the largest vampire stronghold during the war, although it had been destroyed. Paul had a hunch that key clues were hidden there. Perhaps as long as they found the missing vampires, they could locate the abducted Lucy. So he and Hicks rode their motorcycle westward along the desolate and dilapidated land. Every inch of the scenery told the tragedy of that battle. They didn't know how much time had passed. The two finally reached the Wall of the Sun. The shape of this nest was extremely strange. From a distance, it looked like a dormant giant beast. Paul and Hicks grabbed the bones embedded in the cliff. Climbing up along the uneven rocks, they came to a relatively wide cave entrance, but as soon as they stepped in with flashlights on, they sensed something was wrong here. Ahead was an unfathomably deep cave, and the surroundings were eerily quiet. Paul frowned, not daring to let his guard down. It turned out that many years ago, he had led the demon hunting order to this dark nest, to carry out the mission of eliminating the vampire queen. But just as they were about to approach the target, an accident happened without warning. Countless vampires swarmed out of the darkness. The members of the demon hunting order were caught off guard, and suffered heavy casualties in the end. And during the retreat, Paul's close friend Carl was also dragged into the abyss. That tragedy had become an unhealable scar in his heart, so to avoid repeating the same mistake, Paul told Hicks to stay where he was this time. With that said, he jumped down directly, sliding steadily down the rock wall to the bottom of the nest. But the environment here was even more complex. The crisscrossing passages were as complicated as a maze. The intricate forks made it impossible to distinguish directions. Paul could only rely on his intuition to grope slowly forward in the darkness. But unexpectedly, just as he turned a corner, a black shadow suddenly flashed past his eyes. Paul immediately chased after it. He had thought it was a deliberately provocative vampire, but when he saw the other person's appearance clearly, Paul froze in place on the spot, because the black shadow was his former teammate Lena, and the other party also seemed to heave a sigh of relief and took the initiative to explain that she had come specially to pass on a message. It turned out that Lena had also had enough of the church's oppression, so after leaving the holy city, she immediately separated from the other demon-hunting clerics, and came to this nest to find Paul. During their conversation, sudden rapid gunfire came from the direction of the cave entrance. Paul's heart sank suddenly, and he hurried to run towards the sound. Sure enough, he found the vampires hiding here. They were huge in size and muscular. Their strength and defense were far beyond those of ordinary vampires. Clearly, they were high-level vampires, but Paul showed no fear, immediately drawing the cross-shaped silver darts from his waist, and throwing them forward. With Lena's tacit cooperation, Paul took the opportunity to leap into the air, stabbing his dual blades accurately into the vampire's vital points. But even though the immediate crisis was resolved, Paul and Lena didn't dare to let their guard down, for that high-level vampire was clearly guarding something. But this nest had been abandoned for many years. What inside was worth such desperate protection? The three continued to grope forward in the dark and damp cave, filled with doubts. They didn't know how long they walked. Paul suddenly stopped in his tracks. His eyes fell on a newly rebuilt passage. He didn't have time to think and took the lead in entering. Lena and Hicks followed closely behind. They went deep along the passage. The cold and gloomy atmosphere in the air grew thicker. Soon the scene ahead changed again. A towering new nest suddenly appeared before the three. It was larger in scale than the old nest, at a glance. The cliff walls were covered with dense caves. Clearly, many vampires were hiding here. Paul's brows furrowed instantly. His eyes swept quickly and carefully across the empty nests. Then he suddenly and keenly detected a fresh breeze different from the damp underground air, blowing slowly from the other end of the new nest. So he made a decisive decision and led the others towards that direction. After passing through the hinterland of the new nest, an open new cave entrance appeared ahead, and outside the cave was Jericho District, the very place where the other three demon-hunting clerics were heading. Almost at the same time, inside the railway station in Jericho District, an unrecorded black train pulled into the platform. The dozing night watchman was awakened by the vibration, hastily picked up his kerosene lamp and went out to check. Wondering why there was still a train arriving so late, he shouted twice loudly towards the train, but received no response. The night watchman had to step forward to check, but the next second, his blood dyed the entire platform red. Then the carriage doors slowly opened. A mysterious man wearing a bowler hat stepped out.
Let's begin.
At his command, countless vampires poured into the urban area. In just a few minutes, the once peaceful town turned into a living hell. The residents fled in all directions in panic, but most of them became the vampire's prey. As for the mysterious man, he swayed his body gently, seemingly immersed in the pleasure of killing. Just then, three demon-hunting clerics hurried to the scene. They assumed a fighting stance. Among them, the strongest bald cleric launched the attack first. But even though a sharp murderous aura erupted around him, and the silver moon scimitar in his hand whirled brilliantly, it was still easily diffused by the mysterious man. Immediately afterwards, a sharp pain shot through the bald cleric's chest. He looked down and realized that a fist-sized hole had been smashed there, and his heart was in the mysterious man's hand. The other two clerics, seeing their comrade fall, couldn't hide the horror on their faces. The mysterious man wasted no words, directly telling them to either submit, or share the bald cleric's fate. When the first ray of sunlight pierced the sky, Paul and the other two finally reached Jericho District. But the scene before them took their breath away. The once bustling town was now in ruins. Collapsed houses smoked with black fumes. The streets were covered with blood and severed limbs. The three's hearts sank instantly, and they hurried to search the town. But the rampant vampires had long since fled, not a single trace left behind. What angered them even more, the three demon-hunting clerics had all had their hearts torn out, their bodies nailed to the cross in the town center. Clearly, the mysterious man intended to humiliate and mock the church in this way. Paul picked up the blood-stained pocket watch on the platform. Suddenly, something clicked in his mind. There were no vampire nests near Jericho District, nor any reservations holding vampires, so they must have arrived here by train, and the end of this railway track was precisely the Holy City. At this thought, Paul finally understood. This was all an elaborate trap set by the Vampire Queen. It turned out that due to years of industrial pollution, no sunlight had been seen over the Holy City for a long time. Thus, the vampire's only fatal weakness was gone, and the reason the Vampire Queen had someone abduct Lucy was to lure him out of the city. At that time, the church would send experts to hunt him down. In this way, the defensive forces inside the Holy City would be depleted, making it easy for the vampires to seize the opportunity to invade. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Paul hurriedly gathered the remains of the three demon-hunting clerics, then set off back to the Holy City. They dared not delay for a moment, riding their motorcycles at top speed. Finally, after climbing a mountain ridge, they saw the train emitting black smoke. But before Paul could figure out a plan, Hicks behind him suddenly raised his gun and aimed at him. threatening him to promise that he would rescue Lucy no matter what. Unexpectedly, as soon as he finished speaking, Lena dropped a bombshell. It turned out that Paul was Lucy's biological father, so he would do everything in his power to save her no matter what. Hicks was somewhat surprised to hear this, but ultimately breathed a sigh of relief. Immediately afterwards, Paul decided to split up into 3 groups. Lena would go ahead of the railway track to plant explosives and destroy the train's route. He would charge towards the middle of the train to deal with the bowler-hatted mysterious man. Finally, Hicks would sneak in from the rear of the train to search for Lucy, but unexpectedly, as soon as the operation began, Lena was spotted by the ghouls in the carriage. Immediately afterwards, several motorcycles chased after her. Seeing that she was about to be surrounded, Lena resolutely activated the nitrogen acceleration system. The motorcycle shot forward like an arrow leaving the bow, quickly leaving the ghouls far behind. At the same time, Hicks also sneaked through a steel door while the guards weren't looking, but the scene before him made him gasp. Countless vampire embryos were hanging upside down from the brackets on the top of the carriage, as if they would hatch at any moment. While Hicks was cautiously groping around to find Lucy, Paul had already ridden his motorcycle to the middle of the train. He simply abandoned the motorcycle and jumped onto the carriage. But he didn't expect the violent shock from the explosion to make Hicks, who was searching for someone, stumble and fall, accidentally knocking over the bracket holding the embryos. Fortunately, no chain reaction was triggered, and Paul was unaware of Hicks' danger, for he was already overwhelmed himself. The bowler-hatted mysterious man was his long-lost close friend Carl. After Carl was dragged into the vampire nest back then, everyone thought he was dead and gone. But no one expected that Carl not only survived, but also obtained the vampire queen's essence blood, becoming a new species, superior to both humans and vampires. Not only that, Carl even persuaded Paul to join them, stating that he would immediately release Lucy if he agreed. Paul couldn't agree, thus, a showdown was ultimately inevitable. But after being enhanced, Carl's strength and speed far surpassed ordinary humans. Paul struggled even to block one of his punches. He was soon forced to retreat, and was eventually kicked off the roof by Carl without hesitation. Yet as he looked at the falling Paul, a complex look appeared on Carl's face. On the other side, Lena had already arrived ahead of the railway track with the dynamite. She skillfully fixed the bomb at the railway track junction, then quickly walked to the open area, waiting for that persistent group of ghouls. In less than 2.5 minutes, Lena had killed all the besieging ghouls, but before she could catch her breath, she noticed that one ghoul, just before dying, had used his last bit of strength to destroy the bomb. Watching the train still speeding toward the holy city, Lena decided to take the risk and stop the train in a more direct way. At the same time, Hicks was still moving through the carriages. Suddenly a black shadow fell from the roof. He was so frightened that he pulled the trigger randomly, but the bullets not only failed to hit the vampire but also enraged him. What was worse, amidst the sharp roars, the surrounding embryos also burst one after another. Countless vampire larvae crawled out and swarmed toward him. Hicks had no desire to continue fighting and quickly turned to flee to the next carriage. Unexpectedly, he encountered Lucy, who was controlled by ghouls. Ignoring the danger behind him, he immediately chased after her. But just as he was about to use bullets to break open the carriage door, a figure suddenly emerged from under the train. It was Paul, who had been kicked off by Carl. Hicks quickly pulled him out, but before the two could exchange all the information, the carriage door behind them was smashed open by the vampire army. Fortunately, Hicks reacted quickly, and pulled the trigger to shoot the vampire rushing at the forefront, then fired 3 shots in a row at the top of the carriage. Scorching sunlight poured down from the hole in an instant, making the sunlight-fearing vampires dare not move forward. Taking this opportunity, Paul and Hicks quickly passed through carriage after carriage filled with the vampires' reserve food, finally found the private compartment where Lucy was imprisoned. But unexpectedly, Carl had also arrived at this moment. He slapped Paul away with one palm and kicked Hicks out of the carriage directly. Lucy suddenly unleashed her immense power and broke free from the ghouls' restraints, then smashed the kerosene lamp at them. Flames engulfed them instantly. Immediately afterwards, Lucy pulled out a dagger, rushed toward Carl without hesitation, but her strength was still too weak. She was slapped unconscious to the ground in just one round. Paul struggled to get up, but Carl countered by stabbing him with a dagger and pinning him to the wall. Excruciating pain swept through Paul's body instantly. In the end, he could no longer hold on and lost consciousness. Then Carl dragged up the now conscious Lucy, then set the carriage on fire, intending to let Paul fend for himself in the flames. At this moment, Lena had tied the remaining explosives to her motorcycle, pressed the accelerator to the floor and chased after the already distant train at full speed. She was ready to take a desperate gamble to destroy the train directly through the explosion, completely stopping the vampire's conspiracy. As for Paul, nailed to the wall, he seemed to hear a call from the depths of his soul and slowly woke up from his coma. Although he had once abandoned the oath of a demon-hunting cleric, due to the church's oppression, the faith in justice deep in his heart had never wavered, so he pulled out the dagger from his shoulder. The light of battle reignited in his eyes. At this moment, they were less than 100 meters away from the holy city. Carl prepared to carry out his next plan, to turn Lucy into one of his kind. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Paul arrived just in time, and stabbed the cross-shaped silver dart in his hand into Carl's neck. The excruciating pain made him let go of Lucy instinctively. Fortunately, Paul acted quickly, and caught Lucy, who almost fell. The two hung precariously on the edge of the carriage. Carl immediately stepped forward to finish them off, but unexpectedly, the sound of an engine roared in his ears. The female cleric was riding her motorcycle and rushing over quickly. The earth-shaking explosion destroyed the entire train. The ground was covered with the severed limbs of vampires. Carl was also buried in the fire caused by the explosion. Under the judgment of light, all conspiracies fell silent and had nowhere to hide. And at the moment of the collision between the two vehicles, Paul held Lucy and jumped off the train, narrowly escaping death. He gently stroked his daughter's cheek, finally feeling the anxiety and joy of being a father. Before long, Hicks rushed over on his motorcycle. Seeing that Lucy was safe and sound, he finally let go of his hanging heart. Immediately afterwards, Lena also slowly emerged from the smoke. Seeing that everyone was unharmed, Paul picked up Carl's bowler hat. The look in his eyes was complex and indistinguishable. At this moment, the people in the holy city were still led by the church, gathered in the church in neat clothes, devoutly listening to the bishop's sermons, completely unaware that a crisis capable of destroying humanity had just passed them by. Not long after, Paul walked into the church with a vampire's head. Looking at this false piece, a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes as he directly threw the head in front of the bishops. This move instantly caused an uproar, because under the church's propaganda, all humans thought the vampire clan had been extinct. Paul told them to go see the burning train outside the city. The vampire queen wasn't on it. This meant that the war between humans and vampires was still ongoing. But these words were sharply refuted by the archbishop. He listed Paul as a dangerous person, claiming that he was deliberately spreading rumors. Faced with the corruption and degeneration within the church, and the indifference of the people in the holy city, Paul knew he had done everything he could, so he stopped arguing and turned to leave without hesitation. But he and his companions didn't give up because of this. They decided to recruit demon hunters who were willing to pick up their weapons again, to jointly face the upcoming apocalyptic war. This battle was destined to be difficult, but to protect their loved ones and the remaining hope, they were already prepared to go all out. This is the end of the film. Those interested can watch the original film, Priest. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, comment and subscribe. More exciting films. See you next time.